On the day of the wedding, tensions boil over when my mother-in-law finds out about my pregnancy before marriage. During the reception, my mother-in-law stands up in front of everyone, slaps me across the face and shouts, "You beggar! I cannot accept you and my family." This public humiliation shocks the guests, but what devastates me even more is that my husband does not stand up for me. He remains silent and refuses to defend me, leaving me utterly alone in the moment. My father-in-law also remains passive, offering no support, but nobody knows what happens the next day. A storm is brewing. My name is Emily, and I want to share my story with you. It's a story filled with ups and downs, heartbreak and hope, and ultimately the journey to finding my strength. I grew up in an orphanage, a place that was both a shelter and a reminder of what I lacked. The caregivers were kind, but they couldn't fill the void left by my absent parents. I learned early on that life would be a fight, but I also learned how to survive. I kept my head down and focused on my studies, dreaming of becoming an accountant and one day making my own way in the world. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had worked hard and finally landed a decent job as an accountant in Chicago. I thought I was on my way to achieving my dreams when I met David Brooks. He was charming, from a wealthy family, and unlike anyone I had ever known. Our romance was fast and passionate. I was swept off my feet, and for a while, it felt like I had finally found my place in the world. Everything changed when I discovered I was pregnant. The news sent me into a whirlwind of emotions: fear, joy, uncertainty. I remember the day I told David. We were sitting in my small apartment, and I could barely find the words. My heart raced as I said, "David, I need to talk to you about something important. I'm pregnant." His reaction was not what I had hoped for. David's face turned pale, and he began pacing the room. "How can this happen? I don't even know how to be a father," he exclaimed, his voice filled with panic. "David, we can figure this out together," I reassured him, trying to remain calm despite the fear creeping in. "We can plan a future." But deep down, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. David finally calmed down and promised to stand by me, even talking about marriage. However, that was before his mother, Caroline, entered the picture. Caroline Brooks was a force to be reckoned with, an influential businesswoman in her early 60s. She controlled everything in her family's life, including David's. When she found out about my pregnancy, all hell broke loose. She was furious, and I could see the disdain in her eyes as she confronted David about me. "Are you serious about this girl? She's nothing but a beggar. You can't marry her," Caroline shouted, her voice dripping with contempt. Despite David's protests, Caroline made it clear that she would not accept me into their family. I felt like I was being crushed under the weight of her judgment, but David promised to marry me anyway, hoping to shield me from her wrath. The day of the wedding finally arrived. I had imagined it so differently, a day filled with love and joy, but instead, it felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The ceremony went smoothly, but the real drama unfolded at the reception. As we celebrated with friends and family, Caroline stood up, her voice cutting through the laughter and music like a knife. "Emily," she shouted, pointing a finger at me. "You beggar! I cannot accept you in my family." Before I could even process what was happening, she slapped me across the face. I stood there stunned as gasps filled the room. The laughter stopped, guests stared, and I felt all the eyes on me, judging and criticizing. But what hurt the most was David's silence. He didn't defend me, he just stood there, frozen like a statue. I thought I would crumble at that moment. But instead, I felt something ignite within me. I wouldn't let her win. I had spent too long fighting for my place in this world, and I wasn't going to let Caroline take that away from me. After the wedding, I moved into the Brooks Grand Estate, but I soon realized that the fairy tale was over. The reality was suffocating. David was distant, consumed by the pressures of fatherhood and his mother's expectations. Caroline's cruelty became relentless. She belittled me at every opportunity and even questioned the paternity of my child. "Maybe you've been lying about this baby," she would say, her voice sharp and cutting. "David deserves better than this. You're lucky he's even married you." With each passing day, I felt more isolated and unloved. David's silence became a heavy burden on my heart, and I began to wonder if I had made a mistake. Was I strong enough to face this alone? My heart ached as I watched David retreat further into his own world. He began drinking more, and I could sense the shift in our relationship. The love that once felt so strong now seemed like a distant memory. I often found myself wondering how I had ended up here, lost in a life that was supposed to be a dream. The turning point came when I gave birth to my son, Ethan. I remember holding him for the first time, feeling a wave of love wash over me. He was my reason to fight, but as much as I tried to be strong, the loneliness felt unbearable. That's when Mark and his sister, Megan, entered my life. Mark was a man in his early 40s with a limp from an accident, but his heart was big. He and Megan, a kind nurse's aide, became my lifeline in those difficult days. They offered me not just help, but hope, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. One day, as I was struggling to feed Ethan, Mark came over and said, "Emily, you're doing a great job. You have more strength than you realize." I looked up at him, tears in my eyes. "I just don't know how to do this without David's support. I feel lost." "You're not lost," Megan said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You have us. We're here for you." In that moment, I realized that I could build my own family, one filled with love and support, despite the betrayals I had faced. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that would test my resilience and change everything I thought I knew about love and family. But challenges were still ahead. Caroline's grip on David tightened, and my new family would soon face an uphill battle against her machinations. I just hoped I had the strength to stand firm and protect my son. Life in the Brooks mansion was far from what I had imagined. Each day felt like walking on eggshells, and I quickly learned that David was not the partner I needed. He spent more time away from home, finding solace in the bars and clubs of Chicago rather than in the warmth of our new family. I often heard him come in late at night, the smell of alcohol clinging to him like a bad memory. One evening, after a long day of caring for Ethan, I heard David stumble into the house. I was feeding our baby, and the rhythmic sound of the spoon clinking against the bowl felt like my only source of comfort. David entered the room, his eyes glazed over, and I forced a smile, hoping to connect with him. "David, how was your day?" He barely glanced at me. "Fine," he muttered, swaying slightly as he leaned against the wall. I felt my heart sink. The man I had fallen in love with was slipping away, and I was powerless to stop it. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between us grew. Caroline continued her campaign of emotional warfare, finding new ways to belittle me and undermine my role as a mother. "Ethan deserves better than a mother who can barely keep a job," she would say with a smirk, her eyes glinting with malice. I tried to rise above her taunts, but it was exhausting. I felt like I was constantly fighting a battle with no end in sight. One day, as I was struggling to calm a fussy Ethan, I overheard Caroline talking to David in the living room. "He's just a baby, Caroline. He doesn't understand anything." David's voice was strained, filled with frustration. "Oh, he will understand," Caroline replied, her tone icy. "He'll understand that his mother is nothing but a burden. If you don't get rid of her now, you'll regret it later." I stood frozen at the door, my heart racing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did David truly see me as a burden? I felt the walls closing in, the weight of despair crashing down on me. I couldn't let them win. I had to protect my son. That evening, I mustered the courage to confront David. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He looked up from the couch, surprise flickering in his eyes. "About what?" "About us. About Ethan. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not," I replied, feeling my heart pound in my chest. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emily, I'm just trying to figure everything out. I didn't expect this, fatherhood, marriage, all of it." "I didn't either," I snapped, frustration spilling over. "But we're in this together. I need you to be here for me, for Ethan. I can't do this alone." He fell silent, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he finally said, his voice low. "No, you don't understand the pressure I'm under," I shouted, tears stinging my eyes. I'm trying to raise our son while dealing with your mother's constant attacks. I need you to choose me, David. Instead of the support I desperately needed, he turned away, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. Just give me some time, Emily. I'll sort it out. With that, he retreated to his usual spot on the couch, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. Days went by, and my emotional state began to deteriorate. I felt trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury, but lacking love and support. Mark and Megan were my lifeline. They visited often, bringing laughter and warmth to my home. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room, Mark noticed my distress. "Emily, you seem off lately. Is everything okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. I sighed, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on me. "I don't know, Mark. I feel like I'm losing David. He's never home. And when he is, he's not really here." Megan reached out, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're doing an amazing job with Ethan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You're stronger than you think." Their kindness lifted my spirits, but it was clear that the battle wasn't over. Caroline's influence was suffocating, and I could feel her tightening her grip around David. I needed a plan to protect my son and myself from the impending storm. One night, after a particularly hard day, I sat alone in the nursery, rocking Ethan in my arms. The silence enveloped us, but I knew deep down that I had to fight for our future. With Mark and Megan by my side, I began to consider what my next steps would be. I couldn't let Caroline dictate my life any longer. Little did I know, darker days lay ahead. Caroline's desperation would soon lead to a scheme that would change everything. The stakes were rising, and I had to prepare myself for the battle of my life. I took a deep breath, holding my son tightly, determined to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the Brooks mansion grew increasingly tense. I could feel Caroline's presence looming over us like a dark cloud, her disdain for me festering into something more dangerous. David remained distant, consumed by his internal struggles and the growing influence of his mother. It felt as though I was trapped in a nightmare, desperately seeking a way out while fighting to protect my son. One evening, as I was putting Ethan to bed, I heard raised voices coming from the living room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to eavesdrop. I could hear David and Caroline arguing. "You need to put your foot down, David," Caroline insisted, her voice sharp. "Emily is a distraction. She's not good for you or the family." "I don't want to hear it, Mom." David snapped back. "She's my wife, and she's the mother of my child. You need to accept that." His words gave me a flicker of hope, but I knew better than to let it blind me. Caroline's reaction was predictable. "You're making a mistake. She's nothing but a gold digger, and she'll take everything from you. You need to choose your family over her." I felt a chill run down my spine. The stakes were getting higher, and I could sense that Caroline was plotting something sinister. I made my way back to the nursery, holding Ethan tightly, and whispered a promise to him: "I will protect you no matter what." The following week, things took a turn for the worse. Caroline, fueled by desperation, devised a plan that would shake the very foundation of our lives. I received a call from Mark one morning, his voice laced with concern. "Emily, you need to be careful. I just heard something about Caroline's plan. She's looking for a way to take Ethan away from you." I felt my heart drop. "What do you mean?" "Rumor has it she's been talking to lawyers. She wants to claim that you're unfit as a mother and that David should have custody of Ethan," Mark explained, his voice urgent. "Unfit? I'm doing everything I can for him," I replied, panic rising in my chest. "I can't let her take him away from me. He's my entire world." "I know, but we need to come up with a plan," Mark said, his tone serious. "You need to document everything, your parenting, the support you have from Megan and me. We'll fight this together." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, poring over paperwork and notes. I had never felt so vulnerable in my life, but I was determined to protect my son. Each moment I spent preparing was a reminder of the love I felt for Ethan and the lengths I would go to keep him safe. Days turned into a blur of meetings with Mark and Megan, gathering evidence and support. I even reached out to a lawyer who specialized in family law, determined to ensure that I had a fighting chance. But as I fought to secure my future, the tension between David and Caroline escalated. One afternoon, I overheard another argument between them. "You can't let her manipulate you like this, David," Caroline shouted. "You need to think of your reputation." "What about my family?" David's voice cracked. "Emily and Ethan are my family now. Can't you see that?" I felt a flicker of hope once again, but it quickly dimmed when I saw Caroline storm out of the room, her face a mask of rage. It was clear that her determination to separate us was unwavering. One fateful night, as I sat in the living room with Ethan asleep in my arms, there was a loud knock on the door. My heart raced as I opened it to find Caroline standing there, her expression dark and menacing. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold as ice. "About what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know what you're doing, Emily. You're trying to turn my son against me," she accused, stepping inside without invitation. "You think you can just take him away from me." I held Ethan closer, instinctively protecting him. "David is my husband, and Ethan is my son. I'm not trying to take anyone away from you." "Save your lies," Caroline hissed. "I will do whatever it takes to keep my family intact, even if it means getting rid of you." I stared at her, shock and fear mingling in my chest. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," she replied, a sinister smile creeping across her lips. "This isn't over, Emily, not by a long shot." As she left, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. I was in a war, and the stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. My heart raced as I thought about how far Caroline might go to keep control over David and the family name. I turned to Mark and Megan for support, determined to stay strong for Ethan. I knew I needed to prepare for the fight of my life. In the shadows of despair, I found a flicker of resilience, and I was ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The storm was brewing, and I had to be prepared to weather it. The days that followed Caroline's threatening visit felt like a ticking clock, each second echoing my growing fear for Ethan's future. With every confrontation, I knew she was inching closer to executing her plan, and I had to stay one step ahead. I poured my heart and soul into preparing for what was to come, buoyed by the unwavering support of Mark and Megan. One afternoon, as I was reviewing notes from my lawyer, I received a text from Mark. "We need to meet. I have news." My heart raced. I quickly arranged to meet him at our usual spot, a quiet cafe where we could talk without interruptions. "Emily, I found out that Caroline has been spreading lies about you," Mark said, concern etched on his face. "She's telling people you're unstable and unfit to care for Ethan." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "She can't do that. I've done everything to be a good mother." Mark nodded. "I know, but we need to document everything. I suggest you start keeping a detailed journal of your daily activities with Ethan, showing how much you love and care for him. Every little detail counts." With renewed determination, I began to keep a record of each moment I spent with Ethan, his first steps, the way he giggled when I played peekaboo, and the quiet moments when he fell asleep in my arms. Each entry became a testament to my love and commitment as a mother. As I continued to gather evidence, Caroline's attacks grew more aggressive. One afternoon, I received a call from my lawyer informing me that Caroline had filed for temporary custody of Ethan, claiming I was unfit due to my unstable living conditions and lack of family support. My heart sank. It was a blatant lie, and I had to fight back. The day of the court hearing arrived, and my anxiety was palpable. I could feel the tension in the air as I entered the courtroom, my hands trembling. Mark and Megan sat in the back, offering silent support. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Caroline sat across from me, a smug smile plastered on her face. David was there too, but he looked conflicted, glancing between his mother and me. "Your Honor," Caroline began, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Emily is unfit to raise my grandchild. She doesn't have a stable home, and she lacks any real family support." I stood up, determined to defend myself. "Your Honor, I may not come from a wealthy background, but I am a devoted mother. I work hard, and I have a strong support system. Mark and Megan are like family to me. I will do everything to provide for Ethan." The judge listened attentively, and I felt a flicker of hope. I have documentation of my parenting, And I have witnesses who can testify to my character, I continued, gesturing toward Mark and Megan. Caroline scoffed, but I pressed on, sharing my journey as a mother and the love I felt for Ethan. I could see the judge's expression soften as I spoke, and for the first time, I believed that I might have a chance. After what felt like an eternity, the judge announced his decision. I am granting full custody of Ethan to Emily. It is clear she has demonstrated her dedication as a mother. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, tears welling in my eyes. I had done it. I turned to see Mark and Megan beaming with pride. But Caroline was not done fighting. "This isn't over, Emily," she hissed as I walked past her. "Maybe not," I replied, my voice steady. "But I will always fight for my son." As I left the courtroom, the weight on my shoulders lifted. I felt empowered, ready to start anew with Ethan. With Mark and Megan by my side, I knew we could build a loving family. In the following months, life began to take on a new rhythm. I found joy in the little things. Ethan's laughter, his milestones, and the love that blossomed among us. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. Though Caroline and David would always be part of my past, I had learned the power of resilience and the importance of chosen family. My journey had transformed me, and I was finally ready to embrace the future with open arms. Together, we built a home filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. As I held Ethan close, I realized that I was not just a survivor. I was a warrior, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free.